Alright, we're done with small buildings. Let's talk about big buildings. Yeah. I love big buildings, but video games generally don't. Normally when you get a big building, you get just this kind of low poly sheath that's textured however you want it textured. Like that. And that's useful from a dev perspective because you can build your downtown area out of literal blocks and then just texture them however you want, make it look exactly how you like. You put a little something at the bottom, so people feel like the building exists, and you put a little something at the top, so that the players can go there in a helicopter or whatever. But the rest of the building is just a low poly sheath, because there's no way the player is going to interact with the side of a tall building. It's not like the player can, leap long distances and cover huge height differences with their capabilities. It's not like the player is ever going to say, oh, you know what, I wonder what's on the other side of this building, so let's switch to someone with wall climb, and then go across, and then hop out the far side, and then make a sharp turn and jump to the neighboring building and go up the side of that, and then continue on up on the construction scaffolding. It just doesn't happen. So obviously if that did happen, you'd have to put a lot more care into how you build your large buildings, because suddenly they are navigable. They are navigation puzzles. And that's what I like about this game. As the buildings get taller, it becomes more of a challenge to figure out how you're going to move from building to building. With the small buildings we were talking about before, they're all roughly the same size. You can jump from rooftop to rooftop without much difficulty. They're all the same height. But as the buildings get further apart and their roof gets different heights, you start to really consider what sort of spectacular jumps and paths you need to take in order to reach the top. And there are games that let you do this. For example, in Assassin's Creed, you can do exactly what we've been doing here, except of course in Assassin's Creed, you move like a human. So it's an arthritic process. You go to the side of the building where the devs have decided to give you a climbable surface. You climb it in exactly the way the devs tell you to climb it. You go to the roof, you walk out onto a pole that the devs put there, you press left and right to keep your balance or whatever, you move it a snail's pace until you're ready to jump to the pole 3 feet away. It's all set up by the dev. It's all very slow, it's all very arthritic. It's not my kind of parkour. I like to be a little bit more free. I like to express myself, and I can't express myself if I'm just following along with what the dev allows me to do. But of course there is also the opposite side of the issue, where maybe you've got a little too much mobility and you can just run up the side of any building or climb any surface. In that case, it's also a little bit reductive. So games generally tend to either be too focused, too structured, or too reductive, because once I can climb anything in any way I please, the thing doesn't matter anymore, because there's no longer a reason to look at it. It's just a box that I can walk up the side of. But when I have to think about my path, and I have to think about how I want to do things, that's when it gets fun. And I want to be able to think while moving freely. And that's what this game is really good at. It's clear that they did this on purpose. All of these buildings have sticky outy bits that only make sense in a parkour game, so it's clear that the city development team was clearly aiming to create a parkour experience, and a lot of the city layout is very obviously parkour specific. At the same time, it's very clear that the rest of the team didn't give a shit, and at some point they were told to knock it off, because this level is covered in elevators. Like this. We're going to go up there. If you want to go up there, there are 3 routes. 4, I guess. Most of them are elevators. So you just take an elevator. You can actually just literally walk from here to the top of the building. All you have to do is press E once. That's the use button. And that's a shame, because it's very clear that they put in a lot of effort in making that actually a parkour puzzle that you can solve. Now, it's a little bit too much of a very specific puzzle. There's actually like one parkour route you can take. You can't just do whatever you want. But it is still pretty cool. And in most cases, because the buildings have enough random sticky outy bits, you don't have to take a specific path. You can take a path that just is close enough. It just kind of works. By combining the pieces in ways that just kind of work, we have enough freedom of movement to knit them together into an experience that ends up working fine and feels very free. This is very rare. This kind of setup is very uncommon. Normally speaking, your large buildings do not have sticky outy bits that you can walk on. And in fact, most of their large buildings don't. Their large buildings are largely flat surfaces. This has one sticky outy bit here in the middle and one sticky outy bit here at the top, and that's it. So they realized that was an issue, and they used all of these architectural construction elements, which add sticky outy bits to buildings that don't normally have sticky outy bits. Which, I mean, I would have preferred the buildings to have sticky outy bits, but it is a good enough solution. It allows us to have the sticky outy bits we need. And you can see what happens when we don't get those. We get buildings like these. This building here isn't really, not the one that, don't fall off. This building here is technically navigable. You can actually climb all the way up on these outcroppings, but it's the most boring imaginable journey because there's no fun. You don't climb up 3 stories and then go around the corner of the building and then jump up the side and climb around and through. There's just no pathing there. You just follow the same repetitive element over and over and over, and it's not as much fun as if there was a little bit more joy to it, a little bit more freedom. And, we'll talk more about that in a second, but first we got to climb all the way up to where we're going. So we're going over there. This is the sister building, which is also covered in construction gear because, as I said, they needed to add sticky outy bits, and construction gear was the way they chose to do that. And I like the visual of the construction gear. It's yellow and orange. It works really fantastically at standing out and contrasting well with the building. So you might think, oh, so we're going to take this crane across, right? We're going to have this crane swing us out? I don't know. I haven't found any way to move the crane. We can't make this jump. This is impossible. We cannot make it over to that construction gear. But the building has a sticky outy bit. There we go. This is the bridge we took across just a couple seconds ago. And now we are able to climb the outside of this building like we would have climbed the residential building if we had to. And here we are at the top. We have reached the top of this building using nothing but the sticky outy bits that they left for us. And obviously that path was planned. So they obviously planned it. The floating platforms leading across to the residential areas, that's obviously on purpose. The hole in the center of the building, that's obviously on purpose. But I'm pretty sure they didn't intend us to jump across to the neighboring building via a ledge that they happened to leave. And I'm pretty sure they probably don't intend for us to be able to jump back across like this. Maybe they did, but it's not a path that they were like, this is the correct path. If you compare that to something like, say, this, where it's like, oh, where do we go? Oh, I guess we go up here. Oh, where do we go? I guess we follow the path. You can see the difference between going exactly where the devs want you to and jumping around because you like jumping around. Now, I didn't choose this building because it's the only example in the game. I chose this building because it's one of about 12 examples. Climbing around in this game is fun and freeing, and it's not the point of the game. It's just incidental, and that's amazing. It's pretty clear that they intended to do it, but it's not the focus. It's just something that happens in the background because they put together little pieces that allow us to make these jumps when recombined in fun ways. So if we wanted to examine something a little bit smaller, let's go back down. And let's talk about how to add outy bits so that you can, climb the sides of the buildings. Here's a good example. You can see how this building has a bunch of verandas. Now, those verandas are technically climbable. It takes a lot of skill, though. You have to use a character that can do a wall jump and then jump out and jump up and grapple with the wall. It's doable. It's tough, though. So I'm not going to try and show you just because it would take forever. But that's an example of how to do it. However, I don't like it when the way to go up the side of a building is to literally just go up the side of a building. I like it when the buildings have a little bit of complexity to their navigation pattern. I like when you have to turn a corner or jump to a neighboring building And that's just more fun for me. Like getting up here, I jumped across 2 other buildings to get here. Now if we want to go up this building, we can obviously go over there and then jump up and climb. But unfortunately, there is an easy path too. And the easy path is you just go up the wall, because the outie bits they left on this wall form a contiguous path up the side of the building. You don't need any other buildings or any thinking. And that's why it's clear to me that this was never intended to be a parkour-centric experience, because they never developed and polished these assets. If they were trying to make a parkour-centric experience, then the side of the building there that we were just on wouldn't have a complete solution built straight into it. Instead, what you would do is you would have to like follow this around the corner to a neighboring building or something similar. By assembling pieces like that, you can really work. So the idea here is you don't assemble one complete path. And that means, first off, you don't assemble a complete path that just goes up the side of the building like we just saw, but you also don't plan out a circuitous path up the side by going around in a circle and then climbing at a specific point. The point here is that there is no one specific path. There's no one path that's obvious and easy, and there's also no one path that is designated by the devs. If this building just had this bit of scaffold here, it would be impossible to reach the top from there. And if that was the case, we would be forced to go around the side, and then the devs could be a little bit cunning. They could say, oh, well, whatever building we combine it with is going to have its own elements, like this vent system here, for example. And all we have to do is make sure that those elements can be vaguely reached with one of our 30-meter jumps, and it'll work out fine. So by creating a bunch of, vaguely useful elements and combining them arbitrarily, you can get a result that is a lot of fun when you have this level of mobility. And that's really what I'm getting at. That's really what I want to hammer home here. When you're creating large buildings, normally it's just a glass sheath with something on the top and something on the bottom. But when the player has the ability to move, then what you do is you bake in outie bits. You bake in little projections that are just at the right height for the player to get a little bit of verticality out of them. Jump across to a neighboring building. Something fun. And this isn't some theoretical situation. This isn't something where I'm saying, it would be cool if someone built a game like that, because here's the friggin' game. It's already built, and it wasn't even the point of the game. They built it incidentally as they were building the rest of the game. And it is something that is very clearly possible, because I'm frickin' doing it right now. And the big difference between this and something like Crackdown is simply that we can't do everything. We don't have the ability to make absurd, run up the wall, nothing matters sorts of jumps. We have just enough power to make this kind of jump. Just barely. In fact, it would be nice if we didn't have a triple jump. But it's just good enough to be fun and interesting and clever and cunning and have to work at it. And if you're wondering, Craig, aren't you reading into this too much? This is clearly just incidental stuff that you're hacking the program or whatever. There's a certain amount of me being decent at screwing up games and getting to the tops of things. But the only reason I can is because they set it up with pieces that allow me to. You see that up there? That floating disc? That floating disc is not connected to any of the buildings around it. It's floating in space, a good 30 meters away from the nearest building. You can reach it with parkour. The reason you can reach it with parkour is because all of the buildings around it are set up specifically to allow you to parkour your way up the side. They have the outie bits that you need in order to be able to climb them. Now, it's not terribly interesting to climb these buildings because they didn't focus on it. They didn't make it the point. If they had, they could have made it quite interesting to try and get up these, Tron-style buildings. They didn't. However, it may not be interesting, but you can still work your way up these buildings. And that is something that can only be the case because at some point, they made that decision. At some point, they were like, let's make buildings you can climb. And even with what tiny leftovers there are, you can still climb them. And that's what I wanted to get at. This is not some theory. This is not some far-off idea. This is something that they did incidentally, and it's so much fun to move through this city. It's just enormous fun to have the freedom to just go at just the right speed so that you don't feel like you're reducing the buildings to nothing. The buildings still have a topology that matters, but you have the ability to just go and just do whatever you want, and it's just great fun. And if you haven't played the game, this is why I would recommend it. I don't particularly like much of the rest of the game, and that's not really their fault. It's not my kind of game. But I do like the ability we have to just go. And then they ruin it. They ruin it with elevators. Don't put elevators in your games, kids. They're terrible. See you around.